I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're looking at something absolutely fundamental to life itself. Think about every single cell in your body, or even in a plant, as this tiny, bustling, well, actually more like a heavily guarded city. And for that city to survive, it has to constantly bring vital supplies inside and ship waste outside across its borders. Today, we're exploring exactly how that happens by breaking down the incredible transport mechanisms in cells. To kick things off, let's think about a really simple real-life scenario. Have you ever wondered how water actually enters the roots of plants? You pour water into the dirt, and somehow it defies gravity and just pushes its way right into the microscopic cells of the plant's roots. Or, hey, what about this one? How does the oxygen you literally just breathed in make its way inside your individual body cells? Cells simply cannot survive unless materials continuously flow in and out of them. And these everyday mysteries, they're all solved by the microscopic border control systems we call cellular transport. So let's dive right into it. Our learning goal today is pretty straightforward, describing how substances move in and out of cells. We're going to master the two main branches of this whole process. The first branch is what I like to call the peaceful path, also known as passive transport. The absolute most important thing to remember about passive transport is that it happens completely naturally. The cell doesn't have to lift a finger, so to speak. It requires absolutely zero energy from the cell to happen. Under this passive umbrella, the very first method is diffusion. In diffusion, particles just naturally spread out. They move from a place of high concentration, where it's super crowded, to a place of low concentration. It's kind of like someone opening a bottle of perfume in the corner of a room. You don't have to do anything, right? That smell is just going to naturally spread across the room totally on its own. And that brilliantly illustrates our next concept, osmosis. Osmosis is very similar, but it has a specific VIP guest, and that's water. Osmosis is exclusively the movement of water through a selectively permeable membrane. Picture a dry, shriveled up raisin. If you drop it into a cup of water and just leave it there, what happens? The water naturally moves across the raisin's skin and it swells up. That effortless movement of water, that is osmosis in action. The third passive method we have is facilitated diffusion. Because, look, sometimes molecules are just too big to squeeze through the cellular membrane by themselves. They need a little help. They need to be facilitated. Think of a large glucose molecule. It can't just pass straight through the wall, so it uses a protein channel, which acts exactly like an open door in the membrane. It just floats right on in through that door. And remember, because this is the passive path, this door operates without needing a single drop of energy. So the big takeaway here is really simple. Diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion all have one massive thing in common. Do they use energy? It is a resounding no across the board. The cell can basically just kick back and grab a microscopic coffee while nature does all the heavy lifting. Okay, but what happens when the cell needs to work against nature? Let's pivot to part 2, active transport, where things actually need energy. Unlike the passive route, sometimes a cell has to move materials in the unnatural direction. Imagine trying to push a heavy boulder up a steep hill. You're going from a low concentration to a high concentration, and because you are fighting that natural flow, you have to plug in a battery. In cellular terms, this means the cell has to use energy, specifically in the form of ATP. So how does the cell actually pull this off? Well, it uses protein pumps. Think of a protein pump as a microscopic machine built right into the cell wall. A classic example is the sodium-potassium pump. By tapping into that ATP energy battery, this pump physically grabs particles from where there are only a few and forcefully pushes them into an area where there are already a whole bunch. It is actively pumping against the current. Another wild form of active transport is called endocytosis. This is literally how a cell eats large things. Picture a single-celled amoeba just floating around. Step 1, it encounters a giant food particle. Step 2, instead of opening a little door, the entire cell membrane just folds inward, wrapping right around the food. And step 3, it pinches off to form a little bubble, or vesicle, right inside the cell. It takes the material in. And of course, whatever comes in must eventually go out. Exocytosis is the exact reverse process. The cell takes a bubble filled with waste, moves it up to the edge of the membrane, the bubble pops open, and the cell releases those materials outside. It's essentially the cell spitting out the trash. And yes, moving these big, bulky bubbles around definitely takes energy too. To really lock this in, let's put them in a direct microscopic showdown. On one side,
passive transport. No energy, moves from high to low. Completely natural movement. On the other side, active transport. Uses energy, forces things from low to high, completely against natural movement. They are perfect microscopic opposites of each other.
If you ever get stuck on a test or just trying to remember this, use this handy memory trick. Passive starts with P, so think peaceful. No battery needed, totally natural. Active starts with A, so think action. It needs a battery and the cell has to do actual work. P for peaceful, A for action.
All right, let's see how much of this you've locked in with a rapid fire practice session. I'm going to give you a scenario and you tell me the transport mechanism. Ready? Scenario 1. Water enters a plant root. Think about exactly what is moving here. If you said osmosis, you totally nailed it. Remember our rule. Whenever we are talking about the natural movement of water across a membrane, it is always osmosis.
Let's try the next one. Practice 2. Perfume spreads across the room. You open the bottle, you step back, and just wait. What mechanism is taking place there?
That is diffusion. The perfume particles are moving from a highly crowded area inside the bottle and spreading out naturally to the much less crowded areas of the room. Absolutely no energy required.
Okay, here's practice 3, and this one's slightly trickier. A white blood cell encounters a large bacteria, and its membrane actually folds around it to pull the bacteria completely inside. What is this called? That is endocytosis. A great way to remember this is that endo sounds like in. The cell is bringing a massive particle in by folding its membrane. All right, final question. Practice 4. A nerve cell uses energy to move sodium ions across its membrane. Listen really closely to those keywords. What mechanism is happening here? That is a protein pump, which is a classic form of active transport. The second you hear that the cell uses energy or needs ATP, your brain should immediately flash a giant neon sign that says active transport. Excellent job working through those. To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with the golden rule of cells. If the cell does not use energy, it's passive transport. If the cell uses energy to move materials, it's active transport. Understanding these invisible mechanisms is just absolutely mind-blowing when you realize that these tiny doors and pumps are operating by the billions inside you right now. It's the only reason our cells, and by extension we, can stay alive and healthy. So what other invisible processes are keeping you alive right this very second? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.